This is Books for Breakfast, a podcast where we talk about books and writing. I'm Enda Wiley.
And I'm Peter Sirr.
And you're all very welcome to this morning's show. So, the coffee's made.
The toast is on.
And the books are on the table. On today's Books for Breakfast, we're here to celebrate 30 years of the Irish Writers' Centre, that wonderful source of creativity and support for writers and artists at the top of Parnell Square, Dublin 1. And we welcome two very special people who've been closely affiliated with the centre in their own unique way over the years. Valerie Bastani, the current director of the Irish Writers' Centre, and Peter Sirr. So, fellow Books for Breakfast host Peter Sirr, he was the first director of the Irish Writers' Centre when it first opened its door, and he served as director for 11 years, from 1991 to 2002. Since leaving his role as director of the centre, Peter has continued developing as a poet, as a translator, as a writer and a teacher of literature, and he lives in Dublin with me. And to date, the Gallery Press has published his 11 poetry collections since Marginal Zones 1984, and most recently the Gravity Wave 2019, which was a Poetry Society recommendation and winner of the 2020 Farmgate Cafe National Poetry Award. In his newly published essays, Intimate City 2021, Peter takes us wandering through the streets of Dublin, past and present, tracing old routes and discovering new ones. And he's written plays for radio, a children's book and criticism. He teaches literary translation in Trinity College, and he's led many workshops and mentoring sessions. And he's a member of Eistona, the Irish Affiliation of Artists. So I hope I've given Peter a good enough load of praise there. So now, about Valerie. Well, Valerie Bastani is the current CEO and director of the Irish Writers' Centre. And she's a professional arts manager, producer and event coordinator with 20 years plus international experience. Valerie is experienced as a freelance consultant in strategic and vision planning, and she's also an evaluator in the professional and voluntary sectors. She's a certified mediator working in political dialogue facilitation, family and community mediation, and is a founder member of Facing Forward, a restorative justice mediation NGO. So, to start off with, Peter, Dublin in the 1980s was a really different place than the Dublin that we know now. I'm just thinking back, like arts institutions like the Irish Writers' Centre, the Arc in Temple Bar Studios as we know them now, they didn't even exist. And I didn't know you at the time, but you had left Trinity. I remember you told me that the careers office there was called the Office of Careers and Disappointments because everybody had to head off to Europe. And you moved to Holland, then to Italy at the time. When new cultural initiatives were happening in the city centre, they began to take place. Can you tell us about these cultural changes and how you came to apply for the first directorship of the Irish Writers' Centre?
Yeah, sure. And I mean, as you say, I mean, it was the 80s. I mean, I left Dublin and it was a very different place then. It was quite a bleak place in lots of ways. And I mean, it seemed to be kind of falling apart. I mean, all of the buildings on the quay seemed to be kind of falling down. It was slightly miserable. And our kind of generation, a lot of us left because there was so few opportunities here. And a lot of people went to Europe and the States and Britain and so on. But all that began to change in the 90s. I mean, a lot of it had to do with the Temple Bar, the kind of rethinking of Temple Bar that Charles Haughey was responsible for, and the act that caused the kind of the new face of Temple Bar to appear, and the Group 91, the group of architects that designed these new spaces and new buildings, and the opening of all these cultural centres, whether the IFI, Temple Bar Studios, the Arc, the Children's Cultural Centre. So so all these things came on board, things that hadn't kind of been in the city before. I mean, there was always like Dublin's always a place of energy. I think there's always great artistic energy there, but this was the first time there was a kind of public acknowledgement of that. So that was the context. I mean, I, as you say, I'd been living outside of Ireland for about 6 years. At the time, I was living in Milan when somebody sent me the ad for the director of this new thing called the Irish Writers' Centre. I had no idea what it was, and it sounded interesting. And a number of different organisations had come together to set it up. I mean, there was the Irish Writers Union, the Society of Irish Playwrights, the Translators, what was then the Irish Children's Book Trust. And because I well remember the day in what was it, July or August 1991, sitting in Buswell's Hotel being interviewed by, I think, 19 people. I was interviewed in Irish and English by these 19 people, and I thought, oh my God, is this an organisation that I really want to work for? But it was anyway. So I ended up doing it, and the buildings in Parnell Square were being renovated. So that's the Writers' Museum next door and the Writer Centre. So by the time, I spent the first couple of months working out of Liberty Hall with Jacinta Douglas, who then came to work with us in the centre. So the building wasn't even ready to move into. It was still kind of a wreck. But eventually we were able to move in and we started, and we didn't really know that, there wasn't on one level it was a kind of a service place for those organisations I mentioned, but we really, there was no sense of what a writer centre might be or could be or should be. So in a way it was a blank canvas, and we were able to invent it and, to try and figure out what we should do. And so we started organising events. We started organising, as we went on, courses in writing, which have continued to this day. I think that, they've been going on for 30 years now. And we started doing things around the country as well, where we were able to fund kind of readings around the country. But it was a bit hole and corner. It was a bit sort of a shoestring operation. There was pathetically little money, in fact, at the time.
Yeah, well, actually, I was going to ask you about that, because it sounds like there was so much enthusiasm. It sounded like it was a really exciting time. And you mentioned Jacinta Douglas there, and I know you had other great team members with you as well. But there wasn't a lot of money.
No, I mean, it was the very Irish thing of, let's have a building, like all of these new art centres that were coming on board, and all the emphasis was on capital funding and buildings. And then kind of nobody had sort of thought, well, okay, so what do we do when we have the building? How are we going to fund the stuff that goes on in it? Or, and so you were there in this splendid Georgian sort of building, scratching our heads, trying to figure out how are we going to pay for all of the things that we want to do to make this a lively, energetic place where people want to come. So everything. So it was always tricky like that, and we never. I mean, we got more money as we went along. We got a lot of support, obviously, from the Arts Council and from some of our activities, but it was never flush with money. But we were still able to do quite a lot, and we had a lot of events, that kind of thing, bringing people to Parnell Square, persuading people to come farther north than the gate in the 1990s was always a tricky thing as well, trying to get people to sit in, to attend an event in Parnell Square. But we managed. I mean, we had all kinds of people there, all kinds of writers, and Irish and international. We had a kind of good, lively programme.
Yeah, I remember, I just remember further on from that. I mean, you had so many good writers. I'm thinking of the poet Miroslav Holub or Allen Ginsberg. He came in association with Poetry Ireland in 1993, didn't he?
Well, I think it was Theo who brought Allen Ginsberg over to Dublin to read for Poetry Ireland. But I can remember Allen Ginsberg sitting in the Writer Centre watching. He'd come to see Miroslav Holub, and then we all ended up in the Talbot 101 afterwards, where Allen Ginsberg sent every meal back.
He was vegetarian, wasn't he?
He was. So the food wasn't vegetarian enough. But anyway,
it was just such an exciting time. I remember seeing him in Liberty Hall, and then Theo, I think, decided to pay him with a very special gift, isn't that right, Peter?
Yeah, Theo persuaded Allen Ginsberg to come because he offered him a tweed suit. He'd admired a tweed jacket that somebody had worn, and I can't remember who now exactly, but so Theo lured him to Dublin, saying, "Look, I'll get you a tweed suit." Was it Kevin and Howden? But he was buried in that tweed suit.
Yeah, I was just trying to say that's true. But Peter, you're talking about the visions you had for the place, and I know you mentioned that you started up the writing courses. They're still going strong, and Valerie will be talking about those soon. You started a newsletter. I remember, was it called Back to the Centre?
From the Centre. It's called From the Centre, yeah.
I remember that, actually. You even moved the place on technologically. You set up computers in the place, and I know there was a very interesting board meeting once, wasn't wasn't there?
No, well, I can remember the first board meeting, and I was suggesting that we needed to buy a computer, and the board felt this was inappropriate and that we should just get an electronic typewriter. And I think so. There was a vote, and I remember that Cormac O'Quillan was the chairman, and he had a casting vote. And only through his vote was I allowed to buy a computer. So I went down to Trinity to buy a Mac, an Apple, Mac from the Trinity kind of computer store, and that was our one and only computer. But as we went on, I mean, what's downstairs now in the Writers' Centre was actually we set up a computer room there because unlike now, writers didn't tend to have computers, So we had a bank of PCs there where people used to come and write, and so that was one of the things that people didn't have a space that they could work in either. So we provided that kind of a space where they could come and work on, and that was lively as well.
I remember as well that the telephone in the front hall was always a very lively place as well. Writers using it to ring publishers and stuff like that. And you would be rushing out to say, please be quiet, people are working on the computer. I remember that as well.
Oh, there was ructions all the time because, the computers would break down, the printers would break down. I'd be getting phone calls at home, saying, can you come here and fix this printer? I can't print my novel and whatever. So yeah, there was a lot of that.
A lot of action. And Peter, as well, it wasn't just the Irish Writers' Centre in the building. There were other organisations in there as well, weren't there?
Well, as I said, there was the Writers' Union and the playwrights and but they weren't actually physically there. The translators, they would meet there. Obviously, they would have their meetings there. But upstairs was the organisation which is now Literature Ireland. So, for instance, Sinead Mackay was there as well. And at the very top of the building, there was, I suppose they had built an apartment at the very top of the building, and we thought we were going to get our hands on that and that we would maybe have writers come over and live in this apartment. But that ended up being an organisation called Golf Ireland. Dublin Tourism sort of rented it to an organisation called Golf Ireland, who sold, kind of golfing holidays. So there was, but that was it. But it was mainly ourselves, really.
And speaking of Golf Ireland, I remember you told me that you used to receive letters which they would write to you, but they thought it was an Irish wildlife centre. Isn't that right? Some people when they were writing to you.
Oh, no, that was because of the email address, which was iwc@iol.ie or whatever it was at the time. So that was also the Irish Wildlife Conservancy. So I usse to get a lot of emails, from people telling me that they had spotted birds in Wexford and whatever.
Yeah, I like that idea. And you also wrote a poem about that, I remember, which is very good.
I did.
But also the other thing that I used to love about the centre when I'd go in as a young poet was that it was full of paintings. I always felt that it really creatively enhanced the building. Paintings which are still there by Graham Nuttall, Faye Megan, George Potter's brilliant portrait of the artist Claire Vandergrin as you're going up the stairs. Can you talk about them and how you actually acquired them for the building at the time?
It was kind of a remarkable sort of... they were the gift of Frank Buckley. And, Frank Buckley, every so often he would come in, literally he would drive in his Mercedes, park outside, and he would come in with a painting. And he'd say, I've got this painting, I'd like to, and he'd literally stick it up. He'd come in with a friend and a hammer and... and we decide, okay, so we put that there, and as you say, the Graham Nuttall or the Faye Megan, and so we gradually acquired, or he lent his paintings to the centre. So it was very generous, and it added hugely to the atmosphere, as you say, of the building.
Yeah, and so many writers have passed through it, Peter. You've had, by the sounds of it, many highs and many lows in your time as director way back then. But can you think of any particular high that stuck with you?
I don't know. I can think of. I can still remember lots of the events that we had, and we did a great collaborative thing once with Poetry Ireland, which we did when the project was being developed, and they temporarily moved to a street off Moore Street, and it was the Mint. And it was project at the Mint, and we did this thing there called the Stray Dog Cafe on I think it was Sunday nights when the theatre was dark, and we brought in musicians and writers, and we had all kinds of people. We had Kieran Carson, we had Dermot Healy, and we had Agnes Burnell singing, and we had and it was just a great, lively, and we had sponsored drink as well, which caused all kinds of chaos. But we had very lively Sunday evenings, as you can imagine. We had all kinds of people, so things like, I don't know, things like that, and just meeting. I suppose getting to meet writers, or I remember seeing people like Ian Crichton Smith, like Seamus Heaney, Michael Longley, just reading in the building. That was all those things were I suppose among the memories that I'd kind of take away from it.
Yeah, that's nice. And also it was a real tribute, I think, to your time there, that there was a secret party arranged for your farewell. And I remember Seamus Heaney and Dennis O'Driscoll and really wonderful writers coming in to say goodbye to you. So it was always a very lively place. And as I said, even before I knew you, Peter, as a young poet, I think that it was a great place of support for writers, and it still remains so. And talking about it now in its current time, we're going to move over to Valerie, because it's great that we have actually the first director and the current director of the Writers' Centre here with us today. So Valerie, I could see you nodding away and smiling and listening to Peter there. So I'm going to hand you over now to Peter, and Peter's going to have a chat with you about your experiences, your current experiences in the Irish Writers' Centre.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Anna. I mean, we're coming up, as we said at the beginning, to the 30th anniversary of the Writers' Centre. And it seems to me, it's an enormous achievement for any organisation to have been around for such a long time. So obviously, I have a special interest in it since I was there when it started. But I suspect even at that point, I mightn't have guessed that it would still be going strong 30 years later. So it's kind of gratifying that that's happened. And I know when you started, the centre was at quite a low ebb, and you had a lot on your plate at that time. I mean, you initially came on board at a time when the centre was still in a period of tumult. I mean, the funding had been withdrawn and so on. And was that a very difficult time to be beginning this project? I mean, I imagine that trust had to be re-established, and writers emerging and established had to connect again and feel supported. I mean, how was that at your time at the beginning, Valerie?
Well, if I'd known how difficult it would have been at the time, I would have probably been doing something else, Peter. But I'm really happy that you're happy that we're still here. I think that 30 years is a remarkable achievement, and I suppose the love and ownership that writers feel towards the centre is very important, and that's something that came through to me very strongly when I first started. That how many people were invested in this centre, and how important it was that it should continue. I suppose it was very difficult because we weren't on the funding ladder, and I was brought on as a part-time director because there was no money. Actually, there was no money to even pay me, as I found out at the interview when I asked them, "How are you going to pay me? I assume you want me to raise my own salary," and they laughed because it was actually true. So I suppose when I started. As you say, that it was a very dark time for the country. It was post-crash as well, so it was a perfect storm for the centre. It lost its funding at a time when the country was on its knees and there were no jobs. It was almost back to where, when you were saying the career office of what was it? Opportunity and disappointments.
It was the Office of Careers and Disappointment, as opposed to Careers and Appointments.
Careers and Disappointments, perfect. So it was. Yeah, so in a sense, the team who were there was no director, and Jack Hart had come back. The founder, of course, had come back, and just kept the centre open through sheer will and help and support from volunteers. And it was going. The courses were happening. There were things happening. But there was clearly for the Arts Council, it was important to have someone to come in as director and to create a vision for the place and to move it forward. So that's what happened. That's how I came in. And I started in with a team of initially two, because the old team kind of moved on. And it was the wonderful Brendan McEvely, who was in Words Ireland now and doing his own thing, and Amy Heron. And they were just a dynamic duo. They were just the two of us. And then Arnold Fanning as well, who's now a published author, started as a volunteer initially, So we had lots of enthusiasm and much energy. And really it was about footfall. I mean, I was laughing when you were saying getting people further than the gate to the north side. It was an issue it still is an issue, let me tell you. But it was all about footfall, getting people to come back into the centre, not just for courses, but for writers who were not just, I suppose, people doing it for pleasure, but looking at emerging writers, aspiring writers, professional writers. And that still is part of our journey. Like, this is my 8th year now in the IWC, and it's still now we're heading towards really finding things that we can provide for writers that are relevant to them at their professional stage. And what we've done over that period of time is we've created like little incremental steps for them to come on the journey with us. So we're in a stage at the moment where for the first time this year, we're creating a professional development program just for published writers, because they came knocking at the door and said, we need something. Like when we've published our first book, sometimes there's this gap that opens up in front of us. What do we do with the second book? How do we relate to publishers? How do we relate to our audiences and our readers? And we're at a loss. And when I asked them, well, what do you need? They all said different things. And so really this program that we've created, Evolution, is kind of a menu of it's a very bespoke program. I'm excited and nervous about it because we're going to see how well we succeed at doing that. But it's also really exciting that we're working with 2 of our ambassadors, like Mike McCormack is an ambassador, and he teaches out in NUI Galway with Dr. John Kenny there. And they've come on board. So part of the offer will be to offer a professional internships in teaching at 3rd level to 3 people. And it will be paid internships. So that's part of the whole thing, is to keep that professionalization strand going with the things that writers need. And one of the things they need is money.
Sure. I mean, I can see it because you've got a very strong interest in this kind of professional development and in education. And, I'm thinking that because the centre is between 15 and 16 kind of writer in residence programs and, all of that kind of thing. And then, of course, there are the courses. I mean, so is education and that kind of professional development, are these at the core of what the centre is doing these days?
Well, I suppose, yes. So the residencies and we did quite a lot of residencies within the community as well through the years, but we are kind of moving away from that now a little bit to kind of be more strategic about the supports that we provide to writers. So it's about the community, I think, the community of writers as opposed to any other community, and making sure that we're one of the things that I'm really proud of is the collaborative projects that we've been doing aimed at aspiring writers. Something like, for instance, X-Borders means cross-border, but it also means no border. Okay. So the idea is that we're reaching out to writers in the North and the Republic, and we're not making a distinction between them in terms of the supports that we're offering them. And we're finding funding for that to happen and bring them through a mediated process with a mentor, with a publisher, with ourselves, guiding the process and exposing them to different people who will feed their writing so that they can come up with a piece of work that will be, if you like, the bouncing off point for them into their professional career. So a lot of those exports. So the other thing is community, as I mentioned. So my background is in theatre and dance, which is very collaborative. And when I first approached writers and suggested that they do things together, I was, the sense that I got was, oh, no, not really. We're kind of solitary creatures and we like doing things on our own. But actually, when I tried it, when we sort of said, let's do X-Borders, we had such a fantastic response, particularly from emerging writers, that I knew that it was the right thing to do. So what we created was an instant community with 18 people. And we did this 4 times, and they have formed their own Facebook groups. The people from the North know the people from the South. They have gone on with us to do various different things. Like 2 of them, Sue Divin and Michelle Gallen, for instance, have both gone on to become finalists in the novel fair. They've got publishers, they've become published. Michelle was longlisted for the Costa, and so on. So it's a journey.
Maybe, Valerie, could you tell us something about it? Because, I've heard a lot about the novel fair. It seems to have had a big impact. Just maybe for those who don't know anything about it, could you maybe tell us a little about what that is and what it does?
I will indeed, yeah. So the novel fair is basically the fastest way to describe it is it's speed dating between publishers and agents and writers. And it's actually, if anyone's got that novel in their cupboard, in their drawer somewhere, it opens actually, this year's novel fair opens on September the 1st. So basically people apply. It's a competition whereby they send in 10,000 words of their prospective novel, and it gets read by judges. And for publishers, what it does is it eliminates what they call the slush pile, where the judges effectively do the first readings and select people whom they think have publishing potential in all sorts of genres. So it's, children, YA, crime fiction, historical fiction, whatever. And then the 12 go through to a day where they meet the publishers and the agents and they pitch their story. So they have 15 minutes with each of the publishers and agents to do that. And they form a relationship, but also more importantly, they have access to at least 15 or 16 different publishers because they have access to them directly. We prepare them through that process with the judges so they get a chance to practice. And in a sense, a lot of novel fair winners have told us that process of preparation is almost as valuable to them as going to the novel fair and doing the work themselves, because they have that training, they have that ability to do that down the line and into the future if they're not successful the first time around. And the novel fair has produced, upwards of 20 published books.
That's what I was going to ask. I was going to ask. Are there examples of that kind of success, and how has it, or what has happened as a result of it?
Yeah, but for instance, Katrina Lally, whose books Eggshells came out of the novel fair, Katrina would have gone on. Katrina's story is she went on to win the Rooney Prize. And she's an extraordinary person because if you know her background, she worked as a cleaner in Trinity for many years. And she found that cleaning was a really good way of forming her characters. The physical act of cleaning the floors and the halls around her gave her time to think. And then she'd go home in the afternoons and write. And I think she found her publisher, and she found that she has gone on since to be commissioned to do various pieces for Dublin Port and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and actually, I was just going to interrupt there, Valerie, because it is true. I've read and enjoyed Katrina's writing, and she's got a new novel coming out as well, which is another success, Wonderland, with, I think it's New Island Press in October. And she won the Lannan Award. So she's been actually a guest on the podcast as well. So we're great fans of her work. So she is, as you say, a great example of the success of the novel fair. So it's brilliant.
I'm just wondering, obviously there's been a huge surge in Irish writing, Irish writers kind of internationally in recent years. Why do you think that is? Where does that come from? Just think of the enormous success of people and the sheer amount of writing coming out of Ireland now. It's greater than it was when I remember being there at the start of it. It seems to be growing apace. There are new writers emerging every year. Why? Do you have any idea as to why that might be the case?
Well, I think that the environment is getting healthier. There are a lot more journals around. Stinging Fly has done an enormous amount for the landscape and bringing on not only the short story, but writers. Sally Rooney, for instance, came out of Stinging Fly originally, as did many people who have subsequently gone on to great success. I think Literature Ireland has also played a part in sending the Irish writers abroad and bringing, publishing books and translating them into different languages. We're enormously privileged in that the English language, everyone speaks English in the world. So in a sense, we have an advantage over everyone else. But I think there is, people connect to the way that Irish writers write, to the landscape that's described in their books. And there's a universality about it that is generally recognized abroad, and that is an attractive thing. I'd like to think that people are reading more as well, Peter. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, maybe. And I noticed as well that you're moving into the area of commissioning writers in the Writer Centre. I mean, that's, can you tell us a little bit about that? What kind of stuff you're commissioning, or who you're commissioning writing from?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose we've been commissioning small pieces all along. And one of the things we did for our 25th anniversary, as you well know, because you are in it, is our Beyond the Centre, a book that was edited by Declan Mead, the editor of Stinging Fly, and commissioned writers to look back at the then 25 years of Irish writing and how the landscape had changed. It was a very broad brief, as you know. But I think arising out of that, so we normally commission writers for Nollaig na Mán, which is a celebration that we do. It's one of our keynote events, and for maybe Culture Night. And actually this Culture Night, we are working with Fingal County Arts Office and commissioning some pieces for the 30th anniversary, which look at the burning of the cottages out in Loch Shinny and in Skerries. And a few of our ambassadors are involved with this, and Eilish Nicwivna, who is also featured in Beyond the Centre, who talks very eloquently about savage indignation, the idea of people having a beef and going on Liveline. And she says, like, in the absence of going to talk to Joe Duffy, a short story will do. And in fact, what she's done is written a radio play for the Fingal piece. It's called A Burning Tide is the whole project. And she writes it about people writing into Joe Duffy. So it's a little radio play. So she's actually taken that idea, which was first talked about in our book 5 years ago. And obviously that idea has percolated with her over the years, and now it's come out and emerged. And I love that about writers, that, you see something and then the same idea pops up again, either in their writing or something they've said. So there's a constant evolution of thinking and ideas which permeate and deepen. And I think that's so important for us. There are thinkers, and they have the time to reflect the world back to us in a shape that's not herd-like. In a sense, Anne Haverty in Beyond the Centre talks about, it's called laudoxa, which is a Greek term to mean how we've all become rather herd-like in our thinking. And where have we heard that, I wonder, today with what's going on in the world, with the pandemic. So she says that we're less discriminating, we're more fearful, we're more herd-like. And it's the orthodoxy of the mainstream and the ambient consensus. And, in a sense, satire is the antithesis of that. It puts paid to it. And I think writers ought to exercise that right, and do exercise that right of reflecting back to us things that are not necessarily popular to say, but that are important to say. And they have the ability and the carte blanche, if you like, through the artistic process to be able to say those things in a way that can be heard, and maybe through humor as well, and
And sorry to interrupt the two of you there. It's really interesting listening to you. But I have a question for Valerie too. And I was just wondering, who are you intending to attract in the Writer Centre?
Well, I suppose our mission is for writers at all stages of their development. But obviously one of the key things that we're looking at is what is an Irish writer, and who is an Irish writer? And it's basically anyone in this country who wants to participate with us. So we make sure that we open the door in all our calls, that we're really engaging diverse and underrepresented writers in and amongst everyone else who wants to apply for us. And we've done that at board level. So we have 2 new board members of colour with us. And at team level, we have a member of our team who is a person of colour as well. So I think we really want to reach out and to say we are very inclusive and we welcome you, and make that writ large and clear and unambiguous.
Yeah, that's fantastic to know. Thanks, Valerie.
Thanks. And
Obviously, Valerie, there's tons of things happening, and there's lots of things that we could continue to talk about. I mean, I know the ambassadors, including Micheál D. Higgins. There's the focus on the kind of 16-29 age group that you touched on. There's the Irish language kind of remit that you have as well as, and you've talked about the commissioning. It's obviously it's a place of great kind of ferment and liveliness, and we should congratulate you on all of that activity. But I think we're also going to now move you to the other part of this challenging session, which is the Toaster Challenge.
Yeah. That was great listening to the two of you there. I could have listened all morning. So much activity going on. Valerie, congratulations to the Irish Writers Centre, and indeed to Peter for having the bravery and the courage to accept the first position there as well. So now, Valerie, we're moving on to the Toaster Challenge, where you get to talk about a book that you love for as long as it takes to make a slice of toast. And I'm really looking forward to this because the book that you've chosen is one that I also hugely admire. So Peter is getting the bread ready there, and he's going to put it down into the toaster. So I'm going to count you in, Valerie. 1, 2, 3, and off you go.
In the Irish Writers Centre Beyond the Centre anthology, Kevin Barry talks about style. And he says, I knew I would never have a quiet, unshowy prose style. Sometimes I yearned for one, for a clean, brisk, pared down style, clear as glass, unobtrusive. But my style wasn't like that at all. My prose behaved like a hysterical, step-dancing, ginger-haired child leaping up and down on the page looking for attention. Well, as much as Kevin's wild style is loved absolutely the way he is, the style that he yearns for sometimes describes Kent Haruf's Plainsong almost perfectly. Quiet, unshowy, check. Clean, pared down, clean as glass, check. Unobtrusive, to a T. The pace is leisurely, the speed of a country town called Holt in Colorado, where nothing exceptional happens, but all of life is there. Interweaving chapters recount the stories of those who circumnavigate the lives of two women, Victoria Rubidoux, a pregnant teenager who's been kicked out of home, and Ella, mother of Ike and Bobby, aged 9 and 10, who's so clinically depressed she leaves the boys in the care of their father. The second pairing is the McPheron brothers, farmers living on an isolated farm 17 miles from Holt, and who could come straight from Bohola in County Mayo. Their parents died when they were no older than Ike and Bobby, and they stayed put. No other ambition crossed their minds. They are the gift and joy of the book, as they risk their tranquility to take in Victoria Rubidoux at the behest of Maggie, her teacher. That girl needs somebody, and you, she smiled at them, you solitary bastards need somebody besides an old red cow to care about and worry over. It's too lonesome out here. You're going to die someday without ever having had enough trouble in your life. Not of the right kind, anyway. This is your chance. Haruf is a master of invisible symmetries. The two unmothered boys and the old men are so similar that there's just a hint that they could transform into future McPherons. Equally, Haruf describes Victoria Rubidoux's pelvic examination with the same egalitarianism as he offers to the cow that goes through the same process with McPherons. The constant presence of the living landscape is never more than it needs to be, but Haruf's exquisite timing and craft reveals a character's emotional state of mind by creating silent spaces where we can almost hear them think, a kind of visual humanity. There is poetry in this book, a lyricism which hums out its hopeful message without drawing attention to itself, and rightly reflects the book's title of Plainsong as being any simple and unadorned melody or air. I'll leave you with one of my favourite images of the book when the McPherons take Victoria Rubidoux shopping for a crib. The McPheron brothers hefted the two boxes and together carried them ladder fashion under their arms, one old man in his good hat following directly behind the other, out onto the sidewalk and up the block towards the pickup. The girl came after with a store bag full of sheets and blankets. Together they made a kind of parade. The people on the square, shoppers, women and teenage girls and old retired men watched them pass, turning to stare as the two old men and the pregnant girl went by.
Oh, that's wonderful, Valerie. And the toast is not burnt, you'll be pleased to hear. I loved when you described that beautiful, I think such a beautiful luminous novel, really. And he's such a graceful writer, Kentarif, when you described it as a type of visual humanity. And I think that's very true. Another book of his I really loved, I'm sure you've read it as well, Valerie, is Our Souls at Night. Absolutely superb book. I think also a film was made out of it with Jane Fonda and Robert Redford, but nowhere near as good as the book. I think he's great at finding kind of crucial acts of kindness. Did you feel that, Valerie, when you're reading the book? Really in unexpected places as well.
That's it. And I think there's such a generosity to the characters when he paints them. The idea that these two old fellas who, there's such a connection with Ireland in that story, I think. You know, you could really, this could be a McGahern book in a sense, you know, or it could be a Brian Friel book, you know, like a play, you know, it easily is transposable. There's such a universality, but generosity, as you say, in the way he paints the characters, that these old boys could have just carried on their lives, but instead they decide to take this girl on, a pregnant. What do they know about girls? They know nothing about girls. They only know about cows, and they find something really special with her.
It's interesting that you're comparing him to Irish writers, Bernard McLaverty as well. I could see that, you know, that there is a comparison to be made. It's very graceful, at the same time hopeful, because what do they know about a young girl? It's true. Yeah, wonderful writer. And if anybody hasn't read Kentarif's Plain Song or novels like Our Souls at Night, I think Valerie and I'd be very strongly recommending that. So we're coming to the end now of this programme, and we'd like to thank Valerie Bistani for coming in to talk to us about her role as director of the Irish Writers Centre. It's celebrating its 30 years anniversary, which is an incredible achievement. Thanks also to Peter Sirr for talking to us about his role as the centre's first director. And Valerie was talking about Kentarif's novel Plain Song as part of our Toaster Challenge. And as usual, details of this book will be available on our Books for Breakfast website, www.booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. And finally, I would like to say the Irish Writers Centre is there. Peter and Valerie were talking about footfall. So get your shoes on and get walking and cross the Liffey and get up there to the Irish Writers Centre and have a check out what's going on. There's so much going on and you won't regret it. Certainly when from the very first time I pushed that door open, a whole world of writers and writing and possibility opened to me as a poet, and I'm sure it will open to you as well. Not just if you're a writer listening, but if you're somebody who just loves books, loves reading and loves to encounter the written world in a real live way, please do go to the Irish Writers Centre. And again, congratulations to them for 30 years of brilliant activity. Thanks for listening. I think we've reached the end of our Books for Breakfast podcast this morning. I'm definitely rushing off to have more coffee. And I'm Enda Wiley and I have Peter Sirr here with me. And Peter, would you like to tell everyone about the details of the podcast if they'd like to listen again?
Well, you can subscribe at all the usual sources, Google and Apple and so on. And if you want to check out the notes that go along with this podcast, you can go to booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. And yeah, so
we'll be back again. We'll have the toast on. We'll have the kettle boiling. We will have more books to discuss. And we're looking forward to having you here. So goodbye, everybody.